I'm really interested in the sort of macro element of this. A lot of questions, not surprisingly, about China. And what we heard from President Moon was he backs Australia's sovereignty to sign onto the AUKUS deal, and also that he believes Australia is standing up for peace and prosperity. Now, he didn't criticise China, but China has criticised the AUKUS deal and said that will ratchet up tension. So this seemed to be some genuine support from South Korea.
Yes, absolutely. And Tom, thanks for having me. And as always, mentioning my U.S. Navy Reserve affiliation. As a reminder, as I'm not on duty, these views are my own. Yes, absolutely significant. And we talk about strategic competition between the U.S. and allies and China. This is another one of those diplomatic meetings that has very concrete outcomes. A $1 billion defense contract signing, the largest with the U.S. with an Asian nation ever. So that's significant. And also, you mentioned AUKUS, and I would also mention the Quad, right, which is Japan, Australia, and the U.S. and India. Korea, in this case, signaling its approval of that as well. So when we look at these agreements that Australia is making, Australia is also looking for validation from other allies with these agreements that it's not involved in, because we've seen issues with Malaysia and with Indonesia and Philippines sort of pushing back on some of those. So it's important for those words to be said to Australia about that. And of course, celebrating 60 years of diplomatic relations with South Korea and just kind of spreading those the alliances between democracies in the region as well.
Yeah, and remembering South Korea has to be careful given its reliance on China to play nice with its support of North Korea, so it gets complicated for them. I wanted to talk about Afghanistan, though. It's an unimaginably awful situation right now. The country crippled by drought, also affected because of funds linked to the Taliban have been frozen. Now, you might say, well, the Taliban, who cares? But the result is of these reports of families so bereft of any sort of money at all, they can't eat, they can't get medicine for children, that they're selling sometimes one of their babies to mean the other child in the family can live. It's impossible to get your head across, but is there any solution to this? Is there any thought to what countries can do with a temporary reprieve for Taliban funds, as unconscionable as that might be?
Yes, absolutely. And to agree with you, it's just unimaginable to think about that level of poverty spreading throughout the nation so quickly. And to put it in scale, Afghanistan has about twice the population of Australia, and half of its people are facing severe hunger right now, which is about 23 million people. So thinking about that scale, and of course, for them leading into winter, it's bound to be worse. These are the reasons that the about $300 million U.S. was unlocked to go through UNICEF and the World Food Program to provide services. But that's tricky, like Afghanistan, like North Korea, like Yemen. Anytime there is a government in power where those funds could be misused, going directly through the government, then they wouldn't provide them. But at the same time, that's temporary. And a lot of the U.S. Officials have said, we need to build the institutions of Afghanistan. We need to motivate the Taliban to actually build institutions and services that will provide for Afghanistan going forward, sort of investing in the country. And those two things, they're sort of mutually exclusive. It's like providing food right now. We're actually trying to invest in the country, yet you can't be sure that it's going to the right places. Very difficult situation with a whole lot of money.
So, I mean, what's your view? Because again, the situation is just awful. Do you need to say, look, some of this money will probably be misspent, I should say, repurposed for the wrong things, but there might almost be a hearts and minds thing too. I mean, people would find out to some extent, the everyday Afghans, that the money has been freed up by the West. Wouldn't that help in the longer term if you want to ultimately hope this country can look very different in 20 or 30 years?
Well, absolutely. It could absolutely make, sort of a pro-U.S. perspective where there might be an anti-U.S. perspective in some place. But the number one thing is get the money to the people who need the nourishment, who need the health services right now. So you actually have you're sort of plugging a hole in what is becoming a quickly sinking situation in Afghanistan. So, it's about 1/5 or 1/4 of the amount in the fund, and it can be used to work on the short term. But that does not change the fact that the question of the Taliban and what services and institutions it can provide is still up in the air. So it buys a
Yeah.
little bit of time, but certainly does not address the central problem.
A couple of quick ones to shoot through at the end. The change in mind on helicopters, so we're ditching the European-made ones and going for US-made. Cut through all the spin for me. Make this as simple as possible. Why are we doing this? Is it a good call?
Well, Taipan helicopters were supposed to go through 2037, but they're already declining in their reliability. And Australia has a strong case to say, look, the Blackhawks and the Seahawks coming from the US have a strong reliability. But number one, it is definitely a question of interoperability with the US, and Australia is showing with AUKUS and other things that it's going to be buying US. That's absolutely the case when it comes to this as well. And they could be in service as early as next year, but the problem is they won't be built in Australia. So yet another situation like that.
Yeah, and I noted that the Taipans can be up to 50,000 an hour to operate. Get your head around that one. I can't, but I've never worked in defence, I must concede. And on a lighter note, you wanted to mention this one. We will end on a lighter note. 122nd annual Army-Navy football game was this weekend. It's a pretty grandly named trophy. It's
Yes.
the Commander-in-Chief Trophy. Why is this game a big deal?
Well, it is. The West Point Army, the Naval Academy where I went, and Air Force, they all have football teams. And every year it's a big deal when those football teams come together. The Army football team and the Navy football team have clashed every year for over 100 years, as you said, 122. And it's always a big deal, just a reminder of service and a celebration of service in the country. This year, Navy was the underdog, and it's nice to see when my team was the underdog and came back to win in the end. So again, one of the reasons I want to mention it, I'm a little biased, but overall, both teams celebrate service and celebrate one another. So it's great to see that kind of sort of pageantry and team, no matter what's going on in the world, and those teams coming together. So check out some footage, Tom.